Lately I've been playing a lot of Age of Empires 4. It really does bring back the old days of reminiscing of the first and early Age of Empires games. I loved Age of Empires 2, and even 1 to some extent, and Age of Empires 4, whilst it is a bit of a different game, I still adore this thing. But recently they brought out a new update, and I didn't actually think I'd see this coming, because this one is a little bit special. In Season 4, they brought Enchanted Grove. It was a full fantasy update with new game modes, maps, so on and so forth. I mean, I say new game mode. Essentially, it brings a new biome to all the existing maps, bringing some colourful trees, some beautiful fantasy-style blue rivers, cool trees with little light bulb-style things on them. It looks pretty nice, and enchanted stag. It's really, really cool. Of course, it doesn't really actually add anything to the game. Even the stag, I think a lot of people would expect it to do anything different. No, it's exactly the same. It yields exactly the same amount of food as a regular deer or stag, but hey-ho, it looks cool at least. There has been a little bit of controversy around it. Just a few people mentioning how, of course, it's supposed to be a historical game, so adding in a new mythical game mode seems a little bit strange, but I don't know. I don't personally have any queries. I think it is something new, something different. We've expected in these updates in the past to always just be a new faction or new maps, and actually having something that breaks away from the norm, even just for a limited time, I think is quite cool. But I think it hints at something a little bit more. Not only do we have all this enchanted stuff, but we get 4 new maps. I tried out Continental. It's cool. I mean, it's pretty much like every other map in Age of Empires 4, especially playing it in Skirmish, but you know what? It's cool. New content, new maps. I'm all for it, especially when it's free. But the big one for me, at least, is Nomad mode. This was a game mode that came all the way back in Age of Empires 2, and it essentially added in 3 villages. You'd start with them separated, and you'd have to try and find a good place for you to settle. With full fog of war on, you'd be searching around the area of all 3 villages, and then when someone's in a good place with the good resources, put down a town centre and bring the other lads to go and help them. Of course, later game and mid-game even plays exactly the same as every other Age of Empires game, mostly conquest, kill the enemy, but it is a different start. And, you know, it isn't that big of a change in game mode, but bringing back Nomad from Age of Empires 2 adds a bit more of interest, especially with some of the Enchanted Grove stuff that's already been implemented. But this does definitely, all of it, seem less like a real push at adding in more content. Granted, there are 4 new maps and a new game mode, but whilst people are a little bit confused why they've gone the fantasy route, I think it's more just an Easter egg, a tease for the upcoming Age of Mythology remastered. Because we know it's coming, and it has been announced without some sort of release date. But I think this is hinting that we could just be at it closer than we perhaps thought. There have been a few other things added in if you're more on the content side though. Competitive mode with ranked 1v1s and team ranked modes if that's more your thing. And as always, I've been checking out some of the mods. Age of Empires 4 has been somewhat limited with mods, at least compared to Age of Empires 2. That game is off the charts with the modding scene, but the 4th game in the series did something a little bit different. I say different, it just doesn't have the same kind of modding community. Don't get me wrong, the player base is still pretty fresh and still pretty active, yet it really doesn't have the content that I thought would be out, even a year after its release. There are a few custom maps and they're pretty cool, made by the community. But in terms of anything like an overhaul or even RPGs or tower defense modes like we saw in Age of Empires 2, nothing even comes close. I mean, Rose Garden, you can see that on screen. That was a new custom map made by the community, but that's about it. It's not necessarily a terrible thing that the modern community isn't as big, and it's almost to be expected. But I hope in the future, maybe it's just down to the lack of modding tools or the ease of use of Age of Empires 2 over Age of Empires 4's modding UI, means that people have been less inclined to move over. But it could also have something to do with the player base. Despite Age of Empires 4 reaching an all-time peak player record for the franchise, by a long margin by the way, with over 70,000 concurrent players on launch, it still is beaten by Age of Empires 2 definitive in pretty much every other aspect, in terms of a long, consistent player base that keep coming back. I mean, that's kind of to be expected, since it is a 4K remake of the best game of all time, granted. Yet, Age of Empires 4, while still having a very healthy player base, perhaps not being quite as healthy as the older games, means people are less inclined to mod for it. People are less inclined to grow it. And I think there's also some sticklers to the fact that it isn't actually as good as Age of Empires 2. I really love the title itself, but in terms of mechanic and even setting in some way, I still think Age of Empires 2 beats it out in pretty much every other aspect. So a lot of people find that there isn't much reason to play this new one over the old. But what am I saying? There's still thousands of people logging on every single day. And whilst Age of Empires 4 and its developers have done a fantastic job of keeping things up to date and even hinting at a future, I think it is the future that I personally am looking forward to, because Age of Mythology is on its way, but I just don't quite know when.